Week 12 of the fantasy football season, and here's every matchup start to sit at the tight end position. First ball game, Buffalo Bills at the Detroit Lions. So right here, Dawson Knox coming off a good ball game with 14 fantasy points in PPR leagues. And this week here in a good matchup at Detroit that gives up the fourth most fantasy points to tight ends on the season. I'm going to have Knox as a start this week. I know it's been an up and down season for Knox, but the last few weeks here for the most part, he's been a viable fantasy option, and he's a start this week now to Brock Wright and James Mitchell here to the Detroit Lions. Both these guys had some touchdowns over the last couple weeks here, but they're still not options I'm going to recommend for fantasy owners. Only it may be the deepest of leagues, and especially with a tough matchup, they are sit for me this week now to the next game, New York Giants at the Dallas Cowboys. So Tanner Hudson, we've seen some mediocre games out of him the last couple weeks, but right now I'm not going to mention him as a start this week here. Obviously, we got to see more out of him, and he's got to be more consistent as well to even garner fantasy value. So right now, while he's available in 100% of leagues, he's an easy sit this week. And out to the Cowboys, Dalton Schultz, he's obviously a start this week and a good track record over the last couple seasons for Schultz versus this New York Giant team. Him and Dak Prescott have a great rapport. I know last week we didn't see much out of Schultz. It was the Tony Pollard show. But this week here, I think he has a good ball game, and he's a tight end that I have within the top 10 in the rankings. And he's a start this week now to the Patriots at the Minnesota Vikings to close out Thanksgiving ball games. Hunter Henry, just too inconsistent. Mac Jones don't really look his way, and they used him more as a blocker than anything over there in New England. So right now, this week here, he's not a viable fantasy option. I got him as a sit. And TJ Hawkinson, he's been pretty solid for the most part since he got traded to this Minnesota Viking team. And once again, this week here, I have him as a start. Probably a tight end that's going to be within my top 5. And last week, you throw everything out for that Viking team. No one did anything on that offense. But this week here, I have him as a start, and I think he has a good ball game. It's TJ Hawkinson. Now to the Broncos at the Panthers. Greg Dulcich, the first 3 weeks here in his rookie year playing, he was putting up double-digit fantasy points. But the last couple weeks here, we haven't seen much from Greg Dulcich. But this one in a beatable matchup at the Carolina Panthers, I have him as a start. And a guy that I don't know if he's going to make my top 12 in the fantasy rankings at tight end, but still a guy I would go out there and put in my fantasy lineup because he can make some plays. We know he's got big playability and yard after catch ability. Here's Greg Dulcich. And Cortland Sutton for the most part. The only two options in this passing game right now for this Denver Bronco team. Judy hasn't done much. I know Kendall Hinton had a couple decent ball games here and there, but could you really trust him as well? So Dulcich is a start. Now to the Panthers side of things, all season the tight end position has been non-existent between Ian Thomas and Tremble. Besides those guys scoring a touchdown maybe here and there, so Tremble's a sit this week even with Sam Darnold in the lineup. Now to the Texans at the Dolphins, Jordan Akins, another guy really hasn't done much all season, maybe a good game once or twice all year. He's a sit, and no one on this offense pretty much besides Pierce has done much for fantasy owners in Houston, so he's a sit. And out of Miami, Mike Gesicki, last season was a good year for him, but this year, way too inconsistent for my taste for fantasy football. With Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill getting all, obviously, the targets and the plays most of the weeks here for this team. I know Mike Gesicki's had a couple touchdowns sneakily in, but this week here, I can't trust him. Every team is back, and this game could get out of hand early where the Dolphins are running a lot and just put the backups in. Now to the Bengals at the Tennessee Titans. Hayden Hurst last week, it was a down game for him, but this week here, I think could be a possible bounce back game here for Hayden Hurst. We know he's a good tight end. We know he can run the routes. We know he's got some decent hands. And if Jamar Chase is back in the lineup, a lot of defense is going to be rolled towards Chase and Higgins, where Hayden Hurst possibly work in the middle of the field being open. And now with this Tennessee Titan defense as well, you got to play smart versus defense and take what they give you. So right here, they might try to shut down Higgins and Chase, and Hurst might be the guy beneficiary on this. I got him as a start. Now to Austin Hooper, last week was a coming out party for him, finding 2 touchdowns in this one, especially catching one from Derrick Henry as well. But I got to see a little bit more out of Austin Hooper before I'm recommending him as a start. Last week was a good starting point for him, but he's been a guy that's been inconsistent, not really doing much all season. And this week, I have him as a sit. If he has another good game this week, then he's possibly a starter next week. Now to the Bears at the Jets. Cole Kmet, 2 monster games in a row, and he's had 5 touchdowns still in the last 3 games, even though last week he didn't do anything at the Atlanta Falcons. But this week here, I got him back in the starting lineup. Hopefully Justin Fields is going to play in this game, and not Trevor Siemian being the quarterback. But anyway, Cole Kmet's an athlete. A lot of high hopes for him coming into the season. And the first 8-9 weeks, he really didn't do much, but he's turned it around of late. And I'm going to give him one more opportunity as a start this week now to Tyler Conklin. And no one in this Jet pass game is a guy I could trust anymore until Zach Wilson shows he could play, or maybe they go to Mike White and Joe Flacco once again. So right here, Tyler Conklin early in the season, first 3 games, double-digit fantasy points in each game. But ever since he had one blow-up game versus the Patriots in Week 8, but besides then, he hasn't done anything. So he's an easy sit this week. Next ball game, Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Cleveland Browns. So CADE, he was a hero a few weeks ago versus the Los Angeles Rams with a game-winning touchdown. His time was running out. But this week here, he's a borderline option. Cameron Brate, he's been back to practice, and he played a couple weeks ago in Germany before the bye week. And CADE had an off-ball game. So right now, this week here, he's a borderline option at best before we see another breakout game from him. And then you can put him in the lineup. David Njoku, he came back last week off injury versus the Bills, and he didn't do anything. But this week here, I think he has a decent ball game versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he's definitely a tight end I think is going to crack my top 12 this week once the rankings come out. So Njoku, he was on pace for his best season of his NFL career before going out with the ankle injury, and it's good to see him back. And with Deshaun Watson coming back next week as well, all these round pass catches, value's going to go up. But this week here, I have him as a start versus Tampa Bay in a game where they could be chasing points. Now to the Ravens at the Jaguars. Mark Andrews, he's a start each and every week. Top 1, top 2 tight end each and every week. I know the last few weeks he's been banged up, but this week here, I think he gets right and has a big ball game at Jacksonville. So he's a must start. And Evan Ingram, I have as a sit. Evan Ingram, he was starting to put a couple games together where he had double-digit fantasy points. But the last couple weeks, before obviously they went on bye week, he really didn't do much for fantasy owners. And he was dealing with a little bit of back as well. So this week here, in a grind-out type of matchup, I have Evan Ingram as a sit versus this Raven team. Now to the Chargers at the Arizona Cardinals. So if he comes back in this game, Gerald Everett, I have him as a start this week. Obviously, in deeper leagues, he's more of a start than 10-team leagues is Gerald Everett. But right now, this Charger offense getting healthy. Keenan Allen, he's back. He looked good. Mike Williams, we don't know if he's going to play in this ball game. But like I mentioned, Gerald Everett's an athlete who can make some plays and a guy who can work the middle of the field. So right now, I don't know if he's going to make the top 12, but he's definitely a top 15 option this week if he's going to play. Now to Trey McBride of the Arizona Cardinals. We didn't see much out of him with only 4 fantasy points in his starting debut in Week 11 versus the San Francisco 49ers. So I got to see more out of him. We got to see consistency. I'm not saying don't own him on your team, but I'm saying he's a guy to sit this week. We got to see a few games in a row before I recommend him as a start. Now to the Raiders at the Seattle Seahawks. I forced him on row, had a good game a couple weeks ago, and then back down to earth in last week's ball game with only 4 fantasy points. But this week here, a great matchup with the Seahawks that give up the second most fantasy points to tight ends on the season. So right here, I think Forster Monroe can make a few plays. Not saying he's going to have a monster game, maybe 30, 40 yards, possibly find the end zone. But this week here, because the matchup on paper is good, and he's been a decent tight end. I got him as a start now. To the Seattle side of things, Noah Fant, he really hasn't done much in his first season in Seattle. A couple games where he was decent, but not much to go on a fantasy value, so he's a sit. And Will Disley early in the season had a couple ball games with double-digit fantasy points, but he really hasn't done much as well. It's all about the wide receivers. And Metcalf, obviously, Tyler Lockett. So I got both tight ends to sit this week now. To the New Orleans Saints at the San Francisco 49ers, to Juwan Johnson. He's been a touchdown machine since Andy Dalton's been in the starting lineup with 5 touchdowns in the last 5 ball games. So this week here, I don't know if he's going to find the end zone once again as Juwan Johnson, but he's definitely a tight end. You pretty much got to start each and every week. He's finding the end zone. He's getting those big targets from Andy Dalton in the end zone as well. And he's a guy that could go out there and make plays. So I got him as a start. And it's a game where they're going to be chasing points as well. George Kittle coming off a 2-touchdown game versus the Arizona Cardinals. And that's the type of ball game you could get weekly on and off from George Kittle. He's a big play tight end. When he's healthy, he's still one of the top 3, top 5 tight ends in all pro football, in my opinion. And this week here in a pretty good matchup versus the New Orleans Saints, I got him as a start this week. Now to the Los Angeles Rams at the Kansas City Chiefs. So right here, Tyler Higbee, he's been a hit or miss tight end. But right now, they're decimated over there in Los Angeles. And we don't know who's going to start at quarterback. But if it's Bryce Perkins, I think his best friend and security blanket's going to be Tyler Higbee, the tight end here. He still could go out there and make a few plays. And he's a tight end that's been decent this season for the most part. So I'll give him the starting nod this week. Now to the Chiefs, Travis Kelce could be one of the best tight ends already of all time. Last week, a 3-touchdown game. And he's going to have those games some weeks where he just goes out there and puts on a performance. And this week here, once again, I'm not going to say he's going to get 3 touchdowns, but each and every week, you obviously start him. Now to Sunday Night Football, Green Bay Packers at the Philadelphia Eagles. Both tight ends are not really doing much. Robert Tonyan had a couple decent games early in the season, but the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season here, he's been a guy pretty much non-existent in the offense. Christian Watson's getting the targets. Al Lazard's getting the targets. Randall Cobb's back now. And Robert Tonyan's just a guy there that's going to get 30, 40 yards at most and not be a fantasy option. And now to the Eagles side of things, Jack Tolles. He was the tight end filling in for Dallas Goedert, and he really didn't do anything in that ball game. So right here, he's an easy sit before he's a start. We got to see a lot out of him, and obviously that hasn't happened yet for Tolles. This game, yeah, he could break out and possibly be a decent option, but this week he's a sit. And now to the final game, Monday Night Football, Pittsburgh Steelers at the Indianapolis Colts. So Pat Freiermuth, he's had a great rapport with Kenny Pickett. He's been one of the better tight ends over the last few weeks, especially here's Pat Freiermuth. And he's a guy that's possibly going to crack my top 5 at the position this week. So right here, I have him as a start. And now to the Colts side of things, they really don't get much out of the tight end position. It's a revolving door with Mo Alley-Cox, Jelani Woods, Kylan Grayson now the last couple weeks here. But last game, he only had 1 catch in that one. So right now, Indianapolis tight ends really don't do anything for fantasy football. And he's a sit this week. So that's tight end start sits every matchup here, week 12 of the fantasy football season.